All right, so it may seem like we've looked at a lot of positions and your head may be spinning a little bit. So let's take a moment and put them all into a table and summarize the positions and their relationships to one another. So along the top here, we'll have a type of position. So we have three kinds of positions that we talked about. We have characterizations of actual practice, and really the only view we've looked at here is that view of descriptive cultural relativism, descriptive moral relativism, right? A description about the facts of people's actual practices and moral codes across cultures and across times. We have a set of meta-ethical views, so views about the nature of moral judgments, whether they can be true, what makes them true. And then we have normative or prescriptive views that tell us how we ought to go about regulating our behavior, and these views are always tied to a meta-ethical position. So we have three kinds of positions. We have objectivism or universalism, that holds that, in fact, moral judgments are made true by objective, unchanging, and universally true facts about the world. We have relativism, which holds that moral judgments are made true or false relative to features that are intrinsic to specific cultures and specific times. And we have nihilism that argues that there are no features of the universe that give reality to moral properties that make our moral judgments true or false. So all of these views, as Rachel's presents them here, have to be views that are well advanced. And so they all have to deal with this characterization of actual practice that we've termed cultural moral relativism or descriptive cultural relativism, this view that there are differences in moral practices and moral codes across cultures and across times. And so all of these views have to show how those facts either support their view or why those facts don't undermine that view. And the first class of theories that we look at with regard to this set of cultural practices is meta-ethical moral objectivism. Now, meta-ethical moral objectivism is this view about the nature of our moral judgments and the principles that we might use to guide our behavior that are discoverable through these moral judgments. And it says that there are objective facts, there are features of the world that don't change across circumstance or across time, such that they make our moral judgments correct or true, and they make our moral judgments incorrect or false, and hence there are objective principles that can be discovered and agreed upon out there in the world. It has a correlated or related normative prescriptive view, which is normative moral objectivism. And it says, look, if it's true that there are these objective moral facts about the world, that our moral judgments can be discovered to be true, that we can reach consensus based on rational discourse about the truth of moral judgments and the principles that we can then use to guide our behavior, then we should look for those true moral judgments. We should try to reach consensus about what the correct judgments are, and we should use them to guide our behavior. And that's normative moral objectivism. The next meta-ethical position that we look at is meta-ethical moral relativism. Meta-ethical moral relativism says, look, the only way of understanding our ethical and moral judgments as being true or being false, as our understanding our principles as being correct and regulative principles or incorrect and principles that can't regulate our behavior, is features of particular cultures. So shared moral values, shared customs, shared practices, shared histories, right? All of these things are things that make the moral judgments true for the members of that culture or false for the members of that culture. And those things aren't constant across cultures or across times. So to talk about the truth or falsity of a moral principle or a moral judgment, one has to relativize it to the culture in which that judgment is being made or that principle is being invoked. It has that parallel or correlative normative prescriptive position, normative moral relativism, then tells us that how we ought to regulate our behavior is to seek out and discover the norms that regulate behavior within a culture, what is true for that culture, and then regulate our behavior in light of those norms. As long as we're in that culture, we need to discover and regulate our behavior in light of the moral judgments that are made true by the features of that culture. If we go to another culture, then we have to seek out the moral judgments that are made true by the features that are relative to that culture, and then use those judgments to guide our behavior. And the two sets of judgments may not be the same. They may be contradictory in an objective sense, but they'll be true for the cultures in which they're embedded, and we need to follow the norms of the cultures that we find ourselves in. Finally, we have that meta-ethical position, nihilism. Meta-ethical moral nihilism asserts that there are no objective or relative facts that make moral judgments true or that render moral judgments false. There just aren't features of reality that can help us to make rational, correct, true judgments about a course of action. Just not part of reality. And its correlative normative prescriptive view is normative moral nihilism, which denies that we can regulate our behavior by recognizing or coming to know true moral judgments or moral principles, because there's nothing that renders judgments or principles true or false in that way. So again, you can always go back through the lecture segments that talk about each of these views. You can go through this segment that gives us that table summary of the positions and review them so that you can make sure that you're comfortable with all the distinctions and their relationships to one another.